6 days to the bar exam, and I have a question for you. Are you in a trance? Kind of an odd question, but as I talk to students with just under a week to go to the test, I recognize that some of them really are in a trance. You've seen that kind of look before, the bovine stare times a factor of 10. It's the sort of individual who's talked themselves into being literally in a trance about the exam and what's coming up. I think about this because I just had the opportunity to read a wonderful note from a man I admire a great deal, Paul Sheely at Learning. He's one of the founders and creators of photo reading. Paul writes about hypnosis. Now, I have to confess, in my younger days, much younger, I was a high school debater. And we had a debate coach that thought that if we all learned self-hypnosis, we'd be better debaters. I think they actually were right. We did very well, but we all went through self-hypnosis, which was a fascinating experience of talking yourself down and into these trance-like states, and then going into the rounds and competing. I learned how to do it, and I found it actually quite pleasant and helpful. And over the years, as I've learned how to meditate and do some other things that are designed to get your focus in a better place, it's really very much like self-hypnosis. And so I'm fascinated with the subject and with the feel. But what's really interesting to me is that when someone is in hypnosis, and if you're not familiar with it, you've probably seen the magicians or the comedians on a cruise ship who will hypnotize people and cause them to do strange things. Hypnosis is one of those things where someone can literally go into a trance-like state at the snap of a finger or at the mention of a particular word. The way that you know that they're in a trance is that suddenly they're unable to do a basic thing, like they can't say their name or they can't lift their foot up off the ground. Basic, simple things suddenly become impossible because of the suggestion, sometimes the post-hypnotic suggestion. The way that translates into the bar exam is that I see students who in this last week have talked themselves into a state of panic and fear such that they are trance-like. They can't remember basic things in terms of how to study, or they ask things like, how's the exam score? As though it suddenly changed in the last week from what it was a month ago or 3 months ago or 6 months or a year ago. They're unable to do basic, simple tasks like following directions. And I'm not mad at them. It's just a reality that people get freaked out. They become paralyzed with fear. There are things that scare each of us in life. I admit that one of my great fears are snakes. I would become paralyzed with fear if there was a snake in this room right now. For me, that snake is very frightening. And for many people, the bar exam is literally or metaphorically a snake. It scares them so badly that they go into a trance. I'm told that my great grandmother, who grew up on an Indian reservation in Oklahoma as the daughter of a missionary, had a wonderful saying later in life. She was a hard spun woman, as you might imagine. And she said, every feller's got to kill his own snake. What a great philosophy to have. You got to kill your own snakes. But you see, it's impossible to kill your snakes if you're in a trance. Some of you are at this stage literally paralyzed with your fear about the exam, and you can't take the next step forward. So how do you kill your snakes? I think there's some basic things that you can do. Start by exercising. Continue to eat properly. This is not a week to suddenly stop smoking or stop drinking or start doing either of those things. If you've been meditating or praying, this is not a week to stop doing those things either. This is a week to continue some basic steps that you've been going through all along, but to take good care of yourself. It's a great week to go get a massage, to let out some aggression by going to Chuck E. Cheese and whacking on the walls, whack, whack. Do whatever you've got to do to let go of some of that tension and some of that energy. Don't let that energy and tension out by getting into a fight with your significant other or with your children or, God forbid, with your boss. This is not a week to pick fights with people. Don't pick a fight with the poor barista at your favorite coffee shop or with the librarian or with your bar review. This isn't that time. That time is come and gone. Now what you should be doing is taking a calm, purposeful approach to your studies. But if you're in a trance, it's hard to do. What else can you do? I would say that some people right now are in the mode of being trance-like in terms of, I've got to work and work and work. And I work myself into a stupor by studying 10, 12, 15, 18 hours a day. That's really foolish. It just doesn't pay much in the way of dividends. I think you're much better off to study in the way that the exam is going to be given. That is, 3 hours of morning study, a lunch break, 3 hours of afternoon study, an extended dinner break, and some review in the evening. If you're doing that, if you have the luxury of being able to study full time, that's more than enough in most situations. And truthfully, whatever you think you're going to cram over the next 6 days probably isn't going to be all that helpful to you anyway. There are people who get into that trance like state and they think, if I just read another outline or listen to another lecture or do another multi state test or write another essay, it's going to be better. But think about it. Zombie writing is not particularly good, just like zombie movies, but it's not something you need to be doing. And if that's what you're doing mindlessly, which is the equivalent of what this trance like state is, if you are mindless, you're not going to get much value out of the work itself. So work purposefully, work in segments, work to accomplish something. If you're going to do an exam or take a practice test, make it better than the one you did before. If you're going to write an essay, do a better job than the one you wrote yesterday or the day before. Have a purpose when you sit down to study. What do I want to accomplish in this study session? How long will I study and what's my purpose in doing this study? If you've got that in mind, you're going to be in much better shape to make real good use of these next 6 days. I don't think you have to give up and say these are wasted days. They're not at all. They can be incredibly productive, but they're productive because you've got something specific in mind to accomplish rather than being just mindless waste of time. I have students that contact me and say, I don't know what happened the last 4 hours. They just zip by. I was asleep sitting up. They're in a trance. It's not a good place to be, and you need to shake yourself out of it. Look, if you're bright enough to be watching this video at this point, it means you've still got some conscious level of brain activity going on. That's a good thing. Draw on that, build on that, grow with that. You could do great things in the next 6 days. And as we come back in the next couple of days, I'll do a couple more messages before we get to the exam date itself. I'll try and give you some specific tips for each point in the process here as we finish up. And the reason I do that is because I think there's a lot you can accomplish, but you can't do anything if you're in a trance. So if you've been sleepwalking for the last few days, snap out of it. And I'll be back to you in a couple of days with your studies as they continue.